And because water is, again, so much in our minds, the Gulf spill being the salient example, I thought we should invite the doyen of this community, the ambassador to the world's oceans, and a specialist in the plant life of the Gulf of Mexico, Dr. Sylvia Earle.
Thank you.
Thank you, my dear.
I'm really pleased to have a chance to come and talk about water, but also to talk about critters. It's been really enlightening to hear Erica Ritter and Tracy Worcester talk about mostly terrestrial critters and our relationship to them. But what about those that live where most of life on Earth actually is? That is, the ocean, where the water is. 97% of Earth's water is out there in the ocean, and that's where most of life is as well. Our relationship with other forms of life is really curious. We're dependent on having a living planet. Our lives couldn't exist without the lives of all those other creatures that are out there. Most of them we're simply not aware of, not even those that live within our own bodies, upon which we are totally dependent. The microbial world, most of us just don't want to think about. But fortunately, they're there. Henry David Thoreau posed the question in his book about Cape Cod. He asks, who hears the fishes when they cry? Anybody think about fish as animals? We should, and we should think of them with the same kind of respect that we should be thinking about not only human beings, we too are animals, of course, but all of the rest of life on Earth. Well, for me, as a kid, I was, like most kids, curious about all other forms of life. When I'm asked sometimes, how did you get to be a scientist? How did you get to be an explorer in residence at the National Geographic? I say it's really easy. I started out like Joe McGinnis, like every one of you, I suppose, asking questions as a little kid. Who, what, why, where, when, how? And then I never stopped. You know, that's what scientists, that's what explorers are. They're little kids, they never quite grew up. There is an innocence about kids. They pick up an earthworm and they don't think about it as something that is, you know, untouchable until somebody says, "Oh, don't touch that." We lose something precious along the way, that sense of wonder, that sense of curiosity. But if we can somehow keep that childlike approach to asking questions and perhaps think of the rest of life on Earth with respect, and starting with one another, but going through all of the rest of creatures who share the planet with us, we might actually find those elusive goals that we're seeking, like peace among ourselves, peace with the natural world, something that is critically needed now as never before, when there are close to 7 billion of us and the planet doesn't get any larger. We still have the same basic ingredients, rearranged rather considerably, that were around more than 4 billion years ago when life first emerged. So here we are, 2010. Actually, it was 40 years ago that I had a chance to spend some time actually living underwater. Spent 2 weeks in the US Virgin Islands as a so-called aqua-naut. It was one of those strange experiences that everyone has moments that set your life on a different course. Mine started with a little piece of paper that was on the bulletin board at Harvard University. It was asked the question about coming to support or propose what you would like to do if you had a chance to spend 2 weeks underwater. It was a scientist, and a marine scientist at that, the idea to actually sleep with the fishes, to be with the fishes, to actually live underwater for 2 weeks was something I couldn't resist. So I applied and didn't realize until somewhat after the fact that no one had expected women to apply for that project in 1970, to be an aqua-naut living underwater. After all, it was only the previous year that the first footprints were put on the moon. There were no women astronauts. But fortunately, the head of the program, Dr. James Miller, when reviewing the many proposals that came in from all over the country and outside of the country as well, the United States in this case, the reaction was, well, we've got some women here, what will we do with them? Their proposals are pretty good, and they seem to be pretty well qualified. James Miller is said to have said, well, half the fish are female. I guess we could put up with a few women. And they did. And the rest is sort of history, my personal history, because after that, I have, on 8 other occasions, had a chance to live underwater and get acquainted with creatures that live there more intimately than on a plate, more intimately than when up on the surface, and even more so than when just diving in and out, spending a short passport of being actually in the sea. Well, over the years, I have come to think with greater sympathy about life in the ocean. Think, for example, about sharks. When people know that I spend some time underwater, they almost always ask, especially kids, aren't you afraid of the sharks? Next question, have you ever seen a shark? Have you ever been bitten by a shark? It's sharks all the way. Well, when I first began diving, going back long before I had a chance to live underwater, I was advised to look out for those toothy creatures, not realizing that really you have to think about man-eaters, and I don't qualify. And so I stopped worrying and started looking, and anybody who does go in the water a lot realizes sharks really, by and large, are not interested in us. We're not on their menu. They've been around for like 300 million years. Humans have been in the ocean for, bit by bit by bit, a little bit over the last few thousand years. Increasingly during my lifetime, the last 50 years in particular, the idea of getting wet going into the ocean has really increased. So here we are at a time when we consume millions of sharks, about 100 million we take every year. How many of them bite us? Maybe 3 or 4 die of us every year. Maybe not even that. 50 or so get bitten. But 100 million sharks pay the price of our appetite for them. Well, I want to show you a little film clip that came about as a result, in part, of the phenomenon that has happened in recent times known as Google Ocean. Google the ocean in Google Earth. I want to take you to where I was just last week and take you back in time to see something about the history of how we human beings go into the sea, looking through the eyes of William Beebe, an ocean explorer who never quite grew up as a little kid, kept that way all his life, had that sense of wonder, right up to the present time, to look at the Sargasso Sea, a place that now is being looked upon by the government of Bermuda and other parts of the world as a place worthy of protection. Could we have that first video clip, please? You'll see this on Google Earth. Intensely blue, the waters around Bermuda are warmed by the Gulf Stream, one of the world's largest and swiftest ocean currents. Humpback whales pass through these waters each year, migrating from polar feeding grounds. These waters are also known to legions of luminous deep-sea creatures and intrepid undersea explorers. In the 1930s, zoologist William Beebe and engineer Otis Barton descended 1,000 meters into the depths around Bermuda for a first view of life in a place the sunlight never reaches. Beebe compared what he saw to naked space itself, out far beyond atmosphere, between the stars, where the blackness of space, the shining planets, comets, suns, and stars must really be closely akin to the world of life as it appears to the eyes of an old human being in the open ocean, 1/2 mile down. For Beebe and Barton, the comets, suns, and stars were living creatures reflecting rainbows of iridescence, or flashing, sparkling, and glowing with their own living light. Fireflies and glowworms are famous light makers on the land, but in the deep sea, about 90% of the creatures, jellies, fish, bacteria, shrimp, squids, and many others, have some form of bioluminescence to signal one another. Scientists say these bursts of starry light may be the most common form of communication on the planet. In the open sea, jellies are also among the most abundant forms of life. The Gulf Stream current can carry these oddly beautiful drifters along at about 160 kilometers a day. Buffered by the Gulf Stream is a magically quiet, gently rotating mass of sargassum weed that expands over more than 5 million square kilometers of open waters. Isolated by walls of fast-moving currents between Bermuda and Puerto Rico, the Sargasso Sea holds a liquid jungle of creatures which have evolved over the ages to exist in floating forests of golden brown sargassum. Within its leafy, sunlit masses are camouflaged such creatures as loggerhead turtles, filefish, sea hares, and the speckled brown sargasso crab. For scientists, it's a living laboratory, strategically located in the open sea. For creatures that live in the undersea caves, among the reefs, and in the great depths below, Bermuda is simply home. So the Sargasso Sea is the area that is just east of Bermuda, actually partly surrounding Bermuda, a place that some are trying to establish policies for protection for me and for many others. It's a hope spot. If we can find ways to protect parts of the planet that are still in pretty good shape, such as that great body of water that harbors these floating golden forests, there is hope that we can maintain the integrity of a planet that works. And now I'd like to hop over to the other Sargasso Sea, the other place where these great golden forests are known. That's the Gulf of Mexico, where, as you're well aware if you are alive on the planet today, there's a problem. There's a problem born of our acquired and seemingly insatiable taste for consuming fossil fuels. Here is the rig in the Gulf of Mexico in a before image, and here, as it has unfolded in an amazing tragedy, a sequence of errors that resulted in the greatest environmental catastrophe that perhaps the ocean has known. You've seen, perhaps I have been, riveted to the images that have been forthcoming from 5,000 feet beneath the surface. Imagine, it's only a mile. But how can we actually get a mile underwater? It isn't easy. Whales can do it, at least sperm whales can do it, on a single breath of air. But you try it. The deep end of a swimming pool, maybe. Some people can actually hold their breath down to as much as 100 meters, a little bit more on a single breath of air. But for us, average human beings, to actually go into the sea, even with scuba, 50 meters is fairly deep. Some clever physiologists have worked out ways to be able to breathe mixes of gases so that we can actually go as much as 500 meters for short periods of time, or if it's a long period of time, long decompressions. Little submarines, such as the little bathysphere that you saw with William Beebe and Otis Barton in Bermuda in the 1930s, represents a pioneering effort, but we haven't progressed much beyond that, despite the fact that there are nuclear submarines that can power their way around the world. Going deep is a problem. Going deep, going to the ultimate depth, full ocean depth, 7 miles down, has only taken place once in 1960 for about 30 minutes. Where is the will? We have the technology to actually build the machines that will take us wherever in the ocean that we want to go. We have millions of aircraft, millions of ships that have been created over the period that humans have been around. But how do we actually get into the blue heart of the planet? To go see for ourselves what's going on where this mega spill is occurring. We see the surface. The surface news is bad enough. We look at scenes such as this. At a glance, you might say, well, that looks like a big mat of floating sargassum weed, like we saw in the Sargasso Sea off the coast of Bermuda, or in the Gulf of Mexico, places that harbor unique assemblages of creatures, little flying fish, little seahorses that occurred just there. That's their only home, like rainforest creatures. This rainforest of the sea has unique forms of life, great diversity, and a harboring place for little turtles and young tunas and many other creatures. Close up of that sargassum, that floating forest. Just right after the spill, we began to see, you can't actually see the full outline here of the coast of Florida and the northern Gulf of Mexico. I think we have perhaps a bit too much light for this to come through. But just look at this, focus on the little golden spot in the middle. That is the extent of the oil as it begins to spread here. Day 58, day 74, day 83, day 93, day 118. This is the projected pathway of the oil across the northern Gulf of Mexico and down the coast of Florida, and ultimately right up the east coast of the eastern seaboard of the country and across the ocean, curiously heading back to the UK. These are areas that are of particular interest, but actually there's only one place of particular interest as far as I'm concerned in the Gulf of Mexico. That is the Gulf of Mexico itself. A big, beautiful body of water that does more than deliver pounds of shrimp and barrels of oil. It delivers life, not just to the people around the Gulf, but like the ocean as a whole. That 9th largest body of water on the planet, the Gulf of Mexico, delivers oxygen to the atmosphere, delivers rain back to water to the sky and back to us. It's a home for bluefin tuna, creatures that have become quite celebrated in recent times because their numbers have dropped 90% in like 30 years, owing to our appetite for them. Those are creatures that are vulnerable, just as we are vulnerable to the changes that are taking place through our actions. I think of all of us, in a way, as sea creatures, as dependent on the existence of a healthy ocean, as the bluefin tuna, as the sargassum weed and all the creatures that are there, as dependent as coral reefs, because without the ocean, there is no life. Our lives and all of the rest of life on Earth are totally connected to the ocean. Ed Wilson, last year, on his 80th birthday celebration, commented that our actions are so heavy-handed on the natural world that it appears that we're allowing nature to slip through our fingers. The real problem is, though, that through our actions, nature may be letting us slip through her fingers. What's the world going to be like in another 50 years, given what we've been doing in the last 50, the last 500, the last 5,000, but especially the last 50? So, I listened to Jane Goodall speak in Mexico last year. She pointed out that chimpanzees have DNA very much like our own. I mean, 98% the same. And yet chimpanzees do not gather in meetings of this sort to reflect on the past, the present, and the future, or the problems, or the solutions about what they might do to make their world a better place. We have that capacity. We can reflect on what it is that we've done. We can make a difference using that peculiar talent that humans have that does set us apart from everything else. What are we going to do with that capacity to reflect on where do we go from here? We perhaps have the next decade to make decisions that will determine not just the following few years, not just the next 50. This is a pivotal point in time when whatever we do or whatever we fail to do with understanding how we fit in to the natural systems that keep us alive, we'll make those decisions. And all of those in the future who are not at the table making decisions today, not the fish, not the cows, not the dogs, not the kids who are yet to be born, are at the table. We are. You are. It's up to us. Thank you.